Wendy, have you had enough of this nonsense? The man impatiently threw a check in front of me. 50 million, take it and get lost. The delicate white lotus beside him softly pleaded. Charles Scott, don't treat Wendy like this. I sneered coldly and slapped a B ultrasound report right in his face. Charles Scott, this is your child. 50 million, exactly the amount for my abortion and emotional distress. We're even now. With that, I turned and walked away without looking back, leaving them in stunned silence as I made a graceful exit. I had transmigrated into a book, becoming Wendy, the universally despised villainess in a domineering CEO novel. The original host was infatuated with the male lead, Charles Scott, going mad for him, crashing into walls for him, and ultimately ended up with her family ruined and herself dying tragically on the streets. As for me, a corporate drone, my only dream is to have money. When I crossed over, the original host was about to drug the female lead, Rose, at an important business banquet, intending to frame her for losing her innocence, but ended up reaping what she sowed and, by a twist of fate, ended up in bed with the male lead, Charles Scott. I opened my eyes, looked at the face beside me that was so handsome it defied both gods and mortals, and had only one thought in my mind: the plot is about to begin, according to the original plot. Charles Scott will believe that I set him up and despise me to the core. Meanwhile, I will discover that I am pregnant and use it as leverage to force Charles Scott to marry me. From then on, I will embark on my miserable life as the vicious supporting female character, becoming a stepping stone on the path of the main couple's love, only to be tormented beyond recognition in the end. To hell with that. Whoever wants to play the supporting role can go ahead. I just want the money. I quietly got up, got dressed, and slipped away. A month later, holding a pregnancy test with 2 lines, I fell into deep thought. The inertia of the plot is indeed powerful, but this is fine too. In the original book, to compensate me and to get me to stop bothering him, Charles Scott gave me a check for 50 million. The original owner didn't take it, crying and insisting she only wanted him. What a fool. 50 million. Just the interest from putting it in the bank for a year would be enough for me to live comfortably without working. I immediately devised a meticulous runaway with the baby plan. First step, get the money. I timed it perfectly for Charles Scott and Rose's date and rushed straight to the high-end restaurant they frequent. Thus, the scene from the beginning unfolded. Charles Scott's handsome face was now stained with a few drops of water, spilled accidentally by Rose moments ago, making him look even more disheveled. He stared at me, his eyes filled with disbelief and scrutiny, and the sweet, innocent face of Rose beside him also froze, looking at me with tears welling up in her eyes, as if I had done something utterly unforgivable. Sister Wendy, how could you joke about something like a child? I couldn't be bothered to deal with her. I simply took out the bank card I had prepared earlier from my bag and slapped it on the table. Mr. Scott, cashing a check is too much trouble. How about a direct transfer? The password is 6/8, simple and easy to remember. Charles Scott's face darkened like the bottom of a pot. He stared at me intently, as if trying to find some flaw in my expression. Wendy, what kind of trick are you playing now? Playing with the 50 million you gave me? I replied with a smile that reached my eyes. Don't worry, Mr. Scott, with this money, I promise to disappear without a trace and never get in the way of you and Miss Rose again. I paused, glancing at the ultrasound report in his hand, and added, oh, and don't worry about the baby. I'll take care of it cleanly, making sure there are no loose ends. With that, I picked up the bank card from the table, gave it a little wave in his direction, and turned to leave. Behind me came the crisp sound of a cup shattering. I didn't even turn my head. Charles Scott, Rose, goodbye to the men and women in this damn book. I'm going to take my 50 million, raise my own kid, and live my own heavenly life. I handled all my domestic affairs as quickly as possible and booked the earliest flight heading south. As the plane took off, I looked out the window at the city growing smaller and smaller, letting out a long, deep sigh of relief. New life, here I come. I didn't notice that after I left, Charles Scott went mad, sending people to search the entire city for my traces, but found nothing. He stared at the crumpled ultrasound report in his hand, doubting himself for the first time. Could Wendy, who had chased after him for over a decade and loved him with all her heart, really have aborted their child for 50 million and vanished without a trace? 5 years later, a tranquil coastal town in the south. Mommy, are you looking at that uncle's design drafts again? They're so outdated. A little girl with 2 pigtails, as delicate as carved jade, leaned close to me and sighed like a grown-up. Her name is Sunny, and she is my daughter. Beside her, a boy who looked exactly like her but wore a cool, serious expression was intently fiddling with the Lego in his hands. His name is Jasper, and he is my son. Yes, 5 years ago, I couldn't bear to abort the child, and, by the grace of heaven, it turned out to be a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. Looking at these two little ones before me, my heart melted into a puddle of tenderness. Over the past 5 years, I invested that 50 million, making money grow on money, and it has long since exceeded 50 million. I also started working as an anonymous jewelry designer online, under the alias, Nix, and have gained a small reputation in the industry. Life has been so full of flavor that I almost forgot who Charles Scott and Rose were. Sonny, don't be rude. I gently pinched my daughter's little nose. This uncle is a top-tier business tycoon in the country. His company is about to invest in a large resort project in our city, and mommy is studying their style. That's right, the uncle I mentioned is none other than Charles Scott. 5 years have passed, and he has grown from a domineering CEO into a true business emperor. Under his leadership, the Scott Group has expanded its territory to a staggering extent. And I am just an ordinary single mother. We were supposed to be two parallel lines that would never intersect, but fate has a way of playing tricks. Mommy, can we go to the seafood buffet tonight? Sunny hugged my arm and pleaded. Of course, I agreed with a smile. In the evening, I took the two children to the most luxurious hotel in the city. This hotel happened to be the partner of the Scott Group for this project. I had originally wanted to avoid it, but I couldn't resist the children's desire to come. I thought, the city is so big. What are the chances of running into him? It turns out I was still too naive. In the cafeteria, I was focused on peeling shrimp when I suddenly felt a burning gaze fixed on me. I instinctively looked up and froze instantly. Not far away, a group of business people in suits, surrounding a man like stars around the moon, walked in. That man, with his tall and straight figure, cold and stern face, and a pair of deep eyes, was staring intently at me. No, at twilight beside me, Charles Scott. Why is he here? Alarm bells went off in my mind, and my first instinct was to pick up the child and run, but it was already too late. Charles Scott's footsteps halted, his assistant whispered something beside him, but he paid no heed, walking straight toward me. His gaze, sharp as a blade, swept over me before locking firmly onto Jasper's little face, which bore an uncanny resemblance to his own. Mommy, why is that uncle staring at me? Jasper frowned, looking displeased. My heart pounded like thunder. I forced myself to stay calm, pulling Jasper behind me and squeezing out a smile that looked worse than tears. Maybe the uncle thinks you're handsome. Charles Scott had already reached our table. He looked down at me from above, his gaze so complex I couldn't decipher it. There was shock, anger, inquiry, and a hint of a wild joy I dared not dwell on. Wendy, he spoke my name slowly, syllable by syllable, his voice terribly hoarse. I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm. 5 years have passed. What could he possibly do to me now? Sir, I think you've mistaken me for someone else. I feigned confusion as I looked at him. Mistaken, Charles Scott sneered, crouching down until his gaze was level with Jasper's. Little one, what's your name? Jasper gave him a cool glance without saying a word. Instead, it was Sunny who blinked her big eyes and answered crisply, Uncle. His name is Jasper, and I'm Sunny. We're mommy's babies. Charles Scott's body jolted violently. Sunny, Jasper, day after day, morning and night. He raised his head, his crimson eyes glaring at me fiercely, as if he wanted to devour me whole. Wendy, how dare you say they aren't my children? The air seemed to freeze in that moment. Everyone around looked over curiously, including the group of executives Charles Scott had brought with him. I could feel my cheeks burning with a mix of shame and anger. Mr. Scott, please show some respect. I lowered my voice, speaking through gritted teeth. This is a public place. If you keep spouting nonsense, I'll call security. Nonsense. Charles Scott slowly stood up, his tall figure completely overshadowing me, radiating an intense pressure. 5 years ago, you took my money and said you were going to get rid of the child. 5 years later, you show up in front of me with a son who looks exactly like me. Wendy, why don't you explain to me? What is going on? His voice was not loud, but every word struck at the heart. My arms holding the child trembled slightly. How should I explain? say that I had a moment of weakness and couldn't bear to have an abortion, or am I saying that I've been scheming all along, just to bring the child back today to acknowledge their father, coveting the Scott family's wealth, given Charles Scott's suspicious nature? Which one would he believe? I have nothing to explain. I simply decided to let things fall apart. Looking at him coldly, the child is mine alone and has nothing to do with you. The 50 million, I've long spent it all. If you want it back, I have no money. You can have my life if you want. You, Charles Scott was so furious his face turned ashen. He probably had never seen me so stubborn and unyielding before. After all, in the memories of the past, I had always been obedient to him, giving and taking as he pleased. Fine. Very well, Charles Scott, furious to the point of laughter, took out his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. Lawyer James, help me prepare a paternity test application, and a custody modification lawsuit. My heart sank heavily. He wants to fight me for the children. Charles Scott, you bastard. I trembled with rage. What gives you the right? Have you shown them even a shred of concern in the past 5 years? What makes you qualified to be their father? Because they carry my blood. Charles Scott said coldly. Wendy, I'm giving you 2 choices. 1, you bring the children and come back to City A with me, and we get married. 2, we'll meet in court, and I guarantee you won't even get to see the children's faces. I felt as if struck by lightning, frozen in place. Marriage, he actually said he wants to marry me. Is this some new way to humiliate me? Mommy, I don't want to go with him. Moo clung tightly to my clothes, her small body trembling with fear. Sonny was also scared and on the verge of tears, sobbing softly. I don't want an unfamiliar uncle to be my dad. The children's reactions were like a sharp knife, piercing straight into my heart. I suddenly raised my head, meeting Charles Scott's icy gaze, and said word by word, Charles Scott, don't even think about it. After speaking, I ignored him, picked up Sonny, took Jasper by the hand, and quickly left the restaurant under the strange gazes of everyone. Back home, I immediately started packing my bags. I can't stay in this city any longer. I must leave with the child right away, go somewhere Charles Scott can't find us. But where can I go? China is so vast, and Charles Scott's influence is deeply entrenched. Where could I possibly hide? A wave of helplessness washed over me. Just as I was frantically stuffing clothes into my suitcase, the doorbell suddenly rang. My heart skipped a beat, peering through the peephole. I saw 2 men in black suits standing expressionlessly at the door. They are Charles Scott's people. They arrived so quickly. I leaned against the door, feeling as if all the strength had been drained from my body. The doorbell continued to ring persistently. Mommy, who is it? Sonny, rubbing his sleepy eyes, walked out of the room. I quickly covered his mouth and made a shoo gesture to him. Outside the door, one of the men's voices came through. Miss Lynn, Mr. Scott has sent us to pick you and the 2 young masters and young miss up to return to the hotel. Please cooperate. Their tone was polite, but the message left no room for refusal. I know I can't escape. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Tell Charles Scott I won't go with him. I looked at them coldly. Tell him to give up on this idea. Miss Lynn, please don't make things difficult for us, the man in the lead said expressionlessly. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered the call. On the other end of the phone came Charles Scott's icy voice. Wendy, open the door. I told you, I won't go with you. Is that so? He chuckled softly, a hint of cruelty in his voice. I just looked into it. Over the past few years, you've been taking orders under the name Nix, haven't you? Tell me, if I were to reveal that you are Nix, do you think your clients would still come to you for jewelry designs? My heart instantly sank to the bottom. Nix is my biggest secret, the very foundation of my existence. Charles Scott, he actually used this to threaten me. You're despicable. I trembled with anger, my voice shaking. Likewise, he said calmly, I'll give you 10 minutes to come downstairs on your own. Otherwise, you'll face the consequences. With that, he hung up the phone. I stood there, clutching my phone, unable to move for a long time. Outside the window, the night was deep and dark. I know that the peaceful life I had with the children has come to an end. In the end, I still gave in. I couldn't risk my career and the children's future. With my 2 children in tow, I followed the 2 men in black to the presidential suite where Charles Scott was staying. As soon as I entered, I saw Charles Scott sitting on the sofa, holding a glass of red wine, his expression inscrutable as he watched us. and beside him sat someone I never expected to see, Rose. She was wearing a white dress, with delicate, light makeup, and when she saw me, a flicker of triumph and provocation flashed in her eyes. Sister Wendy, you're finally back. She stood up, eagerly trying to take my hand, but I sidestepped to avoid her. Her hand froze in midair, a hint of awkwardness and grievance flashing across her face. Charles Scott. Look at Sister Wendy, she still dislikes me so much. She turned her head, pouting at Charles Scott. Charles Scott frowned slightly but said nothing, his gaze shifting to the two children behind me. When he saw Moo, who looked almost exactly like him, his gaze noticeably softened. Come here, he beckoned to Moo, but Moo shrank behind me, eyeing him warily. Charles Scott's expression darkened. Wendy, is this the fine son you've taught? He's just shy around strangers. I shielded Jasper behind me, speaking coldly. Mr. Scott, what exactly do you want by calling me here? I made it very clear on the phone just now. Charles Scott set down his wine glass, stood up, and stepped closer to me, one step at a time. Come back to City A with me and get married. Impossible. I refused without hesitation. Ha, he sneered coldly, pinching my chin and forcing me to meet his gaze. Wendy, do you think you still have any choice in the matter? His grip was strong. And it hurt. I glared at him stubbornly, not saying a word. Charles Scott, don't be like this. You'll scare the child. Rose walked over, gently persuading him while subtly freeing me from Charles Scott's grasp. She held my hand and said earnestly, Sister Wendy, just listen to Charles Scott. Look, the child is already so big. Can they really grow up without a father? Charles Scott is doing this for the child's sake. Her words made it sound as if I were the unreasonable villain, while she was the noble, righteous saint. I shook off her hand and sneered. In what capacity are you advising me, Miss Rose? As Mrs. Scott, Rose's face turned pale. Over the past 5 years, although Charles Scott had been close to her, he had never married her. This was the biggest thorn in her heart. I was just concerned about you and the child. She lowered her head, looking as if she had suffered a great injustice. Save your act of feigned sincerity, I bluntly called her out. Don't think I don't know what's on your mind. Want to see me make a fool of myself? Want to see me humiliated by Charles Scott? Sorry to disappoint you. I turned to Charles Scott, took a deep breath, and said, I can go back to City A with you, and I can let you acknowledge the child, but I have one condition. Charles Scott raised an eyebrow, signaling for me to continue. We can get married, but we must sign a prenuptial agreement. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, word by word. The terms are simple. First, our assets will remain separate after marriage. I won't take a single cent from the Scott family. Second, you cannot interfere with my personal freedom or career. Third, and most importantly, if we ever divorce, custody of the children must go to me. After I finished speaking, the room fell into a dead silence. Rose looked at me as if I were a madwoman. She probably thought I was crazy, daring to make such a demand to Charles Scott. Charles Scott also narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp as an eagle's, as if trying to see right through me. Wendy, what makes you think I would agree to this? Because you want a complete family, and you want your children to be recognized by the Scott family. I met his gaze without fear. Charles Scott, you're a businessman, you should understand how to weigh the pros and cons. Marrying me, you'll only gain a wife in name, but you'll get 2 lovely children. Silence the gossip. And solidify your position in the Scott family. No matter how you calculate it, you won't lose out on this deal. I deliberately mentioned the status of the Scott family. I knew that although Charles Scott was currently the head of the Scott group, the family was divided into factions, and he had several uncles and cousins eyeing his position. A pair of adorable twins would undoubtedly be the best bargaining chip for him to secure his position and win over the old master. Sure enough. Upon hearing my words, a flicker of emotion passed through Charles Scott's eyes. He remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking slowly. All right, I promise you. Rose's face instantly turned deathly pale. She looked at Charles Scott in disbelief. Charles Scott, you, go back first. Charles Scott interrupted her, his tone carrying a hint of an unyielding command. Rose bit her lip, shot me an unwilling glance, and finally stomped away in her high heels, seething with anger. In the room, only the 4 of us remained. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward. Tomorrow, Lawyer James will bring the agreement over, Charles Scott said as he settled back onto the sofa, resuming his lofty demeanor. Once the agreement is signed, we'll return to City A. I nodded without saying a word. Mommy, are we really going back with him? Sunny whispered to me. I patted her head and comforted her softly. Don't be afraid. Mommy is here, no matter what lies ahead. I will do everything in my power to protect my child, Charles Scott. Since you want to fight, then I will fight with you to the end. Let's see who will win and who will lose in the end. Early the next morning, lawyer James appeared before me with a drafted prenuptial agreement. I read it carefully, and the terms were even more favorable than what I had proposed yesterday. Not only did it clearly state the separation of assets after marriage and the custody of the children, but it also included an additional clause. Charles Scott voluntarily waives his inheritance rights to the children, and all his assets will be equally divided between me and the children in the future. I looked at Charles Scott sitting across from me with some surprise. Has he taken the wrong medicine? What are you looking at? Charles Scott felt a bit uncomfortable under my gaze and snorted coldly. Don't think I'm being nice to you. I just don't want any trouble later. I pursed my lips, picked up the pen, and swiftly signed my name at the end of the agreement. Whatever his intentions may be, it's written in black and white, and it's beneficial to me with no harm. I have no reason not to sign. After signing the agreement, we boarded a private jet back to City A that very same day. On the plane, the two children, experiencing their first flight, were visibly excited, pressing their faces against the window and gazing curiously at the clouds outside. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes to rest, but my mind was already calculating the path ahead. Returning to City A means I will once again step into the vortex I once avoided at all costs, the Scott family, the upper echelons of City A's society, and the watchful Rose. All of this feels like an invisible net, waiting to swallow me whole. What are you thinking about? Charles Scott's voice suddenly echoed in my ear. I opened my eyes and saw that he had somehow sat down beside me. I was thinking about what expression Mr. Scott's fiancée would have upon seeing me, the legitimate wife, I said with a sarcastic smile curling at the corner of my lips. Over the past 5 years, although Charles Scott and Rose had not married, in the eyes of outsiders, they were already a confirmed couple. Rose even positioned herself as the future Mrs. Scott, enjoying immense prestige in the socialite circles of City A. Now, with me, the ex-girlfriend, suddenly returning with a child and directly taking the position of Mrs. Scott, it would be a miracle if Rose didn't go mad with rage. There's nothing between her and me. Charles Scott's brows furrowed, his tone somewhat stiff. Oh, is that so? I feigned surprise. I thought you two already had a child. I remember in the original story, Rose later became pregnant with Charles Scott's child, but unfortunately had a miscarriage, which made him cherish her even more. I wonder how far the plot has progressed now. Charles Scott's face instantly darkened. Wendy, must you always speak with such sharp words? If Mr. Scott doesn't like hearing it, he doesn't have to listen. I turned my head away, ignoring him. The plane soon landed at the private airport in City A. Waiting to greet us was the Scott family's butler, Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank is an elder who watched Charles Scott grow up, highly respected within the Scott family. When he saw me, along with the two children behind me, the expression on his face could be described as a spectacle of emotions. Young master, who is this? Uncle Frank asked hesitantly. My wife, Wendy, Charles Scott introduced without expression. These two are my children, Sonny and Jasper. Uncle Frank's mouth hung open in an O shape, and it took him a long time to close it. What are you standing there for? Hurry up and load the luggage into the car, Charles Scott urged impatiently. Yes, yes. Only then did Uncle Frank snap out of his daze, quickly calling the servants to come forward. We got into the car heading back to the Scott family's old mansion. All the way, Charles Scott was resting with his eyes closed, and there was no communication between him and me. On the other hand, the two children were full of curiosity about the bustling scenery flying past outside the window. Mommy, this place is so much more fun than our home, Sonny said excitedly. I patted her head, but my heart felt somewhat heavy. Yes, this is the most prosperous city in the country, but it might also be the most dangerous place. The car stopped at the entrance of the Scott family's old mansion. It was a sprawling estate-style villa, grand and imposing, reflecting the noble status of its owner. As soon as we got out of the car, we saw a middle-aged woman dressed in luxurious clothes and well-maintained, waiting at the door. She is Charles Scott's mother, Lucy. In the original book, Lucy never liked the original host, thinking her family background was too ordinary to be worthy of her son. Later, when Rose appeared, She praised Rose endlessly and helped Rose suppress the original host at every turn. It could be said that she contributed half of the credit for the original host's tragic fate. Charles Scott, you're back. Lucy's face lit up with a loving smile when she saw Charles Scott, but when her gaze fell on me, her smile instantly froze. Who is she? Lucy's tone was filled with scrutiny and displeasure. My wife, Wendy, Charles Scott replied calmly. Wife? Lucy's voice instantly rose several octaves. When did you get married? How come I didn't know? Charles, have you lost your mind? What about Rose? Where does that leave her? My affairs are none of your concern. Charles Scott's tone also turned cold. These are my children, Sonny and Jasper. From now on, they will live in the old house. Lucy's gaze finally fell upon the two children. When she saw Moo Moo's little face, which was the spitting image of Charles Scott's, she froze in place. Is this your child? Her voice trembled. Charles Scott didn't answer, which was as good as admitting it. Lucy's expression shifted repeatedly, until finally, she took a deep breath and turned her gaze back to me, her eyes filled with complex and unfathomable emotions. Since you already have a child, come in first. I knew that this fierce battle among the wealthy had officially begun the moment I stepped through the doors of the Scott family. Entering the Scott family's old mansion, I finally understood what it truly means to be part of a wealthy family. Luxurious crystal chandeliers, expensive Persian carpets, and the walls adorned with priceless masterpieces. The servants, dressed in identical uniforms and well-trained, dared not even breathe too loudly. Lucy led us to the living room and asked us to sit down. She herself sat in the main seat, picked up a cup of tea, and sipped it slowly, as if pondering how to launch an attack. The two children, probably frightened by the oppressive atmosphere, huddled close to me without saying a word. Miss Lynn, Lucy finally spoke, addressing me by my full name, clearly not acknowledging me as her daughter-in-law. I don't care what methods you use to get pregnant with Charles Scott's child, but our Scott family is not a place for just any stray cat or dog to enter. Before I could speak, Charles Scott furrowed his brow and said, Mom, she is my wife now. Wife, Lucy sneered. Just a marriage certificate. What does that even mean? In our Scott family, when we take a daughter-in-law, we value matching social status. What does Wendy have, besides that face of hers, that could possibly be worthy of you? I'm not worthy, but is Rose any more deserving? I finally couldn't hold back from speaking up. You, Lucy was left speechless by my retort, her face instantly turning ugly. Rose comes from a respectable family. Gentle and virtuous, 100 times better than you, this wild girl who popped up from who knows where. Is that so? I curled the corner of my lips. A woman who, in order to marry into a wealthy family, didn't hesitate to drug me and scheme to get me into bed with your son. That's what you call coming from a respectable family, gentle and virtuous. Mom, your judgment of character really isn't up to par. You're talking nonsense. Lucy angrily slammed the table and stood up. Rose is not that kind of person. Whether I'm talking nonsense, you know it in your heart. I met her gaze without flinching. What exactly happened that night 5 years ago? Do you dare say you knew nothing about it? I was bluffing her. In the original story, Lucy was indeed aware of the incident where the original host was drugged, and she even played a part in pushing it along behind the scenes. She looked down on me, but she was desperate to have a grandson. So she tacitly approved Rose's plan, hoping to borrow a womb to bear a child. Unexpectedly, in a twist of fate, it was Charles Scott who ended up in bed with me. Lucy's face instantly turned deathly pale. She probably never expected that I would actually know the inside story from back then. She pointed at me, too furious to speak. Mom, that's enough. Charles Scott cut her off in a low voice. What happened back then? Let's not bring it up again. Wendy is my wife now. And the children need a stable environment. I hope you can accept them. His tone, though calm, carried a hint of unquestionable authority. Lucy opened her mouth but ultimately said nothing more. She just shot me a fierce glare before getting up and leaving. I knew that the grudge between her and me was now firmly set. In the evening, I was arranged to stay in Charles Scott's bedroom. This is a huge room, decorated in the same cool color palette as he is, black, white, and gray. Minimalist to the extreme, I let the children sleep on the small bed inside, while I prepared to go to the guest room to sleep. Where are you going? Charles Scott came out after his shower, saw me about to leave, and asked with a frown, to the guest room. You're my wife. If you don't live here, where do you plan to live? His tone carried a hint of displeasure. "We only got married by agreement. There's no need to sleep together, right?" I looked at him, my expression completely calm. "Wendy." He walked up to me, his tall figure casting a shadow over me. "Don't forget, in everyone's eyes, our marriage is real. Do you think a loving couple would sleep in separate rooms?" He deliberately emphasized the word loving. "I understand what he means. We need to put on a show, for everyone to see. Then it's settled. You sleep in your bed, and I'll sleep on my sofa. No crossing boundaries." I pointed to the single sofa in the corner of the room. Charles Scott's face darkened, but in the end, he didn't argue. That night, I slept on the sofa while he slept on the bed. In the vast room, only the faint sound of each other's breathing could be heard. I tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep no matter what. 5 years had passed, and I never imagined that one day I would be lying in the same room with him again. Just as I was lost in my wild thoughts, a faint rustling sound suddenly came from beside me. I cautiously opened my eyes and saw a small figure quietly climbing down from the bed, making its way toward me. It was Twilight. "Twilight, what's wrong?" I whispered. "Mommy, I'm scared." He snuggled into my arms and whispered softly. My heart softened, and I held him tightly. "Don't be afraid, Mommy is here." Just then, Charles Scott on the bed also turned over, seemingly awakened by us. He opened his eyes, saw the two of us, mother and son, squeezed together on the small sofa, and frowned. "Come sleep here." He patted the empty space beside him. I froze for a moment. "The sofa is so small. Do you want him to wake up with a stiff neck tomorrow?" he said irritably. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I picked up Moo and moved to the bed. The bed was large, with a distance between him and me that spanned both dusk and dawn, yet I could still clearly catch the familiar, crisp scent of his shower gel. My heart skipped a beat, uncontrollably. The next day, the news of me returning home with the child exploded like a bombshell in the high society of City A. Everyone knows that Charles Scott has always had a woman named Rose by his side, and everyone thought she would be the future Mrs. Scott. Who would have thought that I would appear out of nowhere, and with 2 children in tow? In an instant, all sorts of speculations and rumors began to spread. Some say I am Charles Scott's secret lover, who rose to power by relying on her children. Some say I'm a scheming woman who planned everything 5 years ago, all for today. Even worse, they call me a gold digger who will stop at nothing for money, even using my child as a bargaining chip. I had long anticipated these rumors and couldn't be bothered to pay them any mind. However, Charles Scott, in order to quell the gossip and silence the public, decided to host a grand banquet to formally introduce me and our child to everyone. The banquet is set for 3 days later, right at the Scott family's old mansion. For these 3 days, the entire Scott household has been turned upside down with preparations. Although Lucy doesn't think much of me, for the sake of the Scott family's reputation, she personally took charge of organizing this banquet, striving for perfection in every detail. On the other hand, happily enjoyed the peace and quiet, spending my days playing with the children in the garden or sketching design drafts in my private studio. That's right. Charles Scott actually prepared a studio for me in the old house with excellent lighting, fully equipped with all kinds of professional gear, even more professional than the one I had back in my small town. "Don't think I'm trying to win you over," he said, still with that awkward demeanor. "I just don't want you going out and making a spectacle of yourself, embarrassing me." I couldn't be bothered to argue with him and gladly accepted this grand gift. With this studio, my next venture could continue. That afternoon, I was in the studio working on my sketches when Rose showed up uninvited. She was dressed in the latest Chanel suit, wearing exquisite makeup, and strutted in on high heels with an air of arrogance. "Wendy, you really are quite the schemer," she began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "It's been 5 years, and your skills at seducing men have certainly improved." I set down my paintbrush and looked at her calmly. "Likewise, Miss Rose. Your talent for twisting the truth and playing the victim is quite impressive too, isn't it?" Rose's face turned pale with my retort. She took a deep breath, as if remembering the purpose of her visit today, and put on a pitiful expression once more. "Wendy, I came today to beg you," she said, her eyes already reddening. "I know you hate me, but Charles Scott is innocent, and the children are innocent too. Could you give Charles Scott back to me?" I almost laughed in disbelief at her audacity. "Rose, are you out of your mind? Is Charles Scott some object that belongs to your family? How can you just demand him back?" Besides, it was him who used the child to threaten me into coming back in the first place. Why don't you go beg him to let me go, Charles Scott? He's just temporarily blinded by you and the child. Rose bit her lip stubbornly. The one he loves is me. We were supposed to get married soon, and it's all because of you. You ruined everything for us. Get married? I laughed as if I'd heard the biggest joke. Rose, have you forgotten? 5 years ago, Charles Scott gave me 50 million just to make you happy and told me to get lost. If he really loved you all these years, why hasn't he married you? Don't tell me you actually believe that without me, you could become Mrs. Scott. My words were like sharp knives, stabbing straight into Rose's heart. What she minded most was Charles Scott's reluctance to marry her. You're talking nonsense, she screamed, completely shedding her disguise. Charles Scott loves me. You're nothing but a despicable, shameless third party. You and your bastard child should both die. As she spoke, she lunged at me in an emotional frenzy, trying to grab my hair. I had been prepared and sidestepped her. She missed her target and fell to the ground in a clumsy heap. At that moment, the studio door was suddenly pushed open. Charles Scott and Lucy stood at the entrance, taking in the entire scene. Rose, what are you doing here? Charles Scott's expression instantly darkened. Seeing Charles Scott, Rose immediately put on an act, lying on the floor, covering her face, and sobbing loudly. Charles Scott, I just wanted to come see Sister Wendy. To beg her to accept us, but she not only cursed at me, but she also pushed me. Upon hearing this, Lucy immediately felt heartbroken. She hurried forward to help Rose up, glaring at me angrily. Wendy, you vicious woman, Rose came to see you with good intentions, and you actually dared to lay hands on her. I sneered coldly, pointing to the surveillance camera in the corner of the studio. Whether I laid hands on her or not, won't it be clear once we check the surveillance footage? Rose's sobbing abruptly ceased, her face instantly turning deathly pale. She probably never expected that my studio was equipped with surveillance cameras. Lucy's expression also turned somewhat awkward. Charles Scott's gaze shifted between me and the calm surveillance camera, finally settling on Rose, his eyes icy cold. Get out. He spat out 3 words coldly. Charles Scott, Rose still wanted to say something. I don't want to repeat myself. Rose's body trembled. In the end, she didn't dare to say anything more. Under Lucy's pained gaze, she covered her face, sobbing as she ran out. The room fell silent once again. Lucy shot me a fierce glare before rushing out after her. Charles Scott walked up to me, his gaze fixed on me with a complicated expression. Did you know she was coming all along? I didn't know she would come, but I knew she wouldn't let it go easily, I said calmly. So, I made some preparations in advance. He remained silent for a long moment before suddenly speaking up. Stay away from her from now on. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Afraid I'll bully your sweetheart. I'm afraid you'll be the one at a disadvantage, he said, then turned and walked away. I watched his retreating figure, feeling an indescribable emotion in my heart. This man was becoming more and more difficult to understand. On the night of the banquet, the Scott family's old mansion was brightly lit and filled with guests. Almost all the prominent figures in City A had gathered there. I wore a starry evening gown of my own design, holding onto Charles Scott's arm as we appeared before the crowd. Sunny and Jasper were also dressed in matching little suits, following behind us like 2 delicate porcelain dolls. The appearance of our family of 4 instantly captured the attention of the entire room. Awe, envy, disdain, curiosity. All kinds of gazes intertwined, wrapping around me like an invisible net. I straightened my back, wearing a proper smile on my face, calmly handling all of this. Charles Scott, is this your wife? Truly, seeing her once is better than hearing about her 100 times. A man who somewhat resembled Charles Scott, but with a hint of gloom in his eyes, walked over. He was Charles Scott's second uncle, Bob Scott. He was also the person within the Scott family who most wanted to bring Charles Scott down. Uncle, Charles Scott called out indifferently. You're in the wrong here, Charles Scott. Bob Scott deliberately acted warmly, patting Charles Scott on the shoulder. Such a big happy event. Why didn't you tell the family? If it weren't for today's banquet, we would still be kept in the dark. His words, seemingly a joke, were actually accusing Charles Scott of disrespecting his elders and acting arbitrarily. It happened suddenly, and there hasn't been time yet. Charles Scott's tone remained flat, revealing no emotion. Haha, I understand. I understand, Bob Scott chuckled, then turned his gaze toward me. Sister-in-law, you look unfamiliar. I wonder which family's daughter you are. This was an attempt to probe my background. I smiled slightly and replied with neither humility nor arrogance. Uncle, you're joking. I'm just an ordinary person, hardly worthy of being called a daughter of a noble family. Oh, an ordinary person. A flicker of disdain flashed in Bob Scott's eyes. Then it must be quite a stroke of luck for you to marry our Charles Scott. His words, on the surface, were praising me, but underneath, they were a sarcastic jab at me for climbing the social ladder. The smile on my face remained unchanged. Yes, it truly is my fortune to marry Charles Scott. However, I believe that having two such lovely children is an even greater blessing for Charles Scott, don't you think? As I spoke, I gently pulled Sunny and Jasper in front of me. The moment the two little ones made their appearance, they immediately captured everyone's attention, especially Moo Moo's little face, which is exactly like Charles Scott's, is simply the most powerful proof. Bob Scott's face stiffened. He himself only has a useless son, who has always been looked down upon by the old master. Now, with Charles Scott suddenly having a pair of twins, wouldn't the old master spoil him to the heavens? Haha. Yes, yes, Charles Scott is truly blessed. And our Scott family is truly blessed, Bob Scott said with a forced smile, but his eyes grew even darker. After sending Bob Scott away, we welcomed a new wave of greetings. Among them, naturally, was Rose. Today, she was wearing a white fishtail dress that accentuated her graceful figure, making her look delicate and captivating. Standing beside her were her parents, the chairman and chairwoman of the Robinson Group, Charles Scott. Miss Lynn, Chairman Robinson took the initiative to greet us, though his expression was somewhat unpleasant. After all, having one's own daughter returned like a package is something no one would be happy about. Chairman Robinson, Mrs. Robinson. Charles Scott nodded politely. Rose looked at Charles Scott with a face full of grievance. Her eyes read as if she were about to burst into tears at any moment. Charles Scott. Rose. Charles Scott interrupted her, his tone distant and cold. Today is the banquet for Wendy and me. I hope you won't cause any trouble here. Rose's body swayed slightly, as if she had suffered a heavy blow. Mrs. Robinson, heartbroken for her daughter, couldn't help but speak up. Charles Scott, where has our Rose wronged you? After so many years of feelings between you, you just cut it off like that. And now you've brought back such a woman. How is Rose supposed to face others in the future? Her words were harsh, and the people around us cast curious glances my way, clearly eager to watch the drama unfold. Before I could speak, Charles Scott pulled me behind him, looking coldly at Mrs. Robinson. Mrs. Robinson, please mind your words. Wendy is my wife, the young mistress of the Scott family, not just some woman. As for me and Rose, we have always been just friends. How can there be any talk of feelings? Charles Scott's words were like a resounding slap, striking the Robinson family's faces with force. Rose's face instantly turned as pale as paper. The people around them also began to whisper. So, Charles Scott and Rose were never a couple. Then all these years, Rose had been flaunting herself everywhere as the future Mrs. Scott. Wasn't that just a joke? You. Chairman Robinson was so angry that he pointed at Charles Scott, unable to get a word out. Just then, the doors of the banquet hall were pushed open once again. An elderly man dressed in traditional Chinese attire, looking spirited and vigorous, walked in with the support of Uncle Frank. It was the patriarch of the Scott family, Old Master Scott. The entire room fell silent instantly. Everyone respectfully greeted the old master. The old man nodded, his gaze sweeping across the entire room before finally settling on our family of four. He walked toward us with steady, measured steps. My heart couldn't help but leap into my throat. This man was the true authority of the Scott family. His attitude would directly determine the status of me and the children within the Scott household. The old man walked up to us and came to a stop. He didn't look at me, nor did he glance at Charles Scott. Instead, he directly crouched down, looking at Sunny and Jasper. On his face, there appeared a gentle, kind smile that had never been seen before. What are your names? Hello, Grandpa. My name is Sunny, Jasper. One child sweet, the other cool and handsome. The old man was thoroughly amused. Haha, good. The old man stood up, took 2 red envelopes from his pocket, and tucked them into the children's hands. This is a gift from Grandpa for meeting you. Then, he turned his gaze toward me, sharp and profound. You are Wendy. I met the scrutinizing gaze of old Master Goo, neither humble nor arrogant, and nodded. Yes, grandfather. This address of grandfather came naturally from my lips. Since I've decided to stay, I must put on a proper show. A flicker of surprise crossed the old man's eyes, as if he hadn't expected me not only to be unafraid of him but also to accept this identity so calmly. He looked me up and down, then finally nodded slowly. Not bad, much more pleasing to the eye than that sniveling little girl. The little girl he referred to was, of course, Rose. Rose's face grew a few shades paler. Charles Scott. The old man turned to Charles Scott, his tone carrying a trace of unquestionable authority. Since you brought her back and acknowledged the child, then live a proper life. Stop stirring up all this nonsense and embarrassing our Scott family. Understood, grandfather, Charles Scott replied respectfully. With the old man's words, this farce had officially come to an end. The Robinson family left in disgrace. Although Bob Scott and the others were unwilling, they had no choice but to temporarily back down. After the banquet ended, I took the two exhausted children back to the room. Charles Scott followed us in as well. Thank you for today, I said to him sincerely, looking into his eyes. Regardless of his intentions, he stood up for me in front of everyone today and helped me out of a difficult situation. I should be grateful to him. I was just protecting my own reputation, he replied, still with that awkward demeanor. After saying that, he turned and walked into the bathroom. I watched his retreating figure and couldn't help but smile wryly. This man really is a stubborn mule. The days that followed passed with unusual tranquility, although Lucy still didn't like me. With the old master's words, she no longer dared to openly show me a sour face. Charles Scott left early and returned late every day, busy with company affairs. Between him and me, aside from playing the role of a loving couple in front of elders and outsiders, we had almost zero communication in private. I was like a songbird kept in a gilded cage, living a life free from worries about food and clothing, yet also dull and monotonous. The only joys were spending time with my child and continuing my next venture. One day, I received a collaboration invitation from France. It was from the internationally renowned luxury brand, DE. They had taken a liking to my designs and wanted to invite me to serve as the chief designer for their latest high-end jewelry collection. For me, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If I can successfully collaborate with DE, my career will reach a new level. However, this means I must go on a business trip to France for at least a month. I told Charles Scott about this matter. No way. He refused without even thinking. Why? I frowned. Our prenuptial agreement clearly states that you cannot interfere with my career. I'm not interfering with your career. I just don't agree with you going abroad. He looked at me, his tone firm. You're a woman, with 2 children. I'm not comfortable with it. The children can be taken care of by the nanny and mom. I'm just going for work, not for fun. I said no, and that's final. He left no room for discussion. I'm absolutely furious. This man is simply the epitome of domineering and authoritarian. Charles Scott, don't forget, we're only married by agreement. You have no right to control my personal freedom. Agreement, he sneered, stepping closer to me step by step. Wendy, have you forgotten that the premise for that agreement to take effect is that we are husband and wife? As long as I refuse to acknowledge it for a single day, that agreement is nothing but a worthless piece of paper. I was trembling all over with anger because of him. You're shameless. Takes one to know one. He pinched my chin, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Wendy, I advise you to behave yourself, be a good Mrs. Scott and stop dreaming about those unrealistic things. With that, he released me, turned around, and left the room. I watched his resolute back, feeling a deep sense of helplessness welling up inside me. I thought I could trade a piece of paper for freedom and peace, but I was wrong. As long as I remain in the Scott family, as long as I am still Mrs. Scott, I will never truly escape his control. Am I really going to be trapped here for the rest of my life? No, I will never accept this fate. I take a deep breath, a flicker of determination flashing in my eyes. Charles Scott, since you won't let me live in peace, then no one will have it easy. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't contacted in a long time. Hello, is that Lucas? It's Wendy. A surprised male voice came from the other end of the line. Wendy, is it really you? You finally reached out to me. Lucas, I need you to do me a favor. Lucas, whose full name is Lucas Lincoln, was my senior in college and also my best friend. He came from a well-off family and was highly capable himself. After graduation, he founded a public relations company, which gained a decent reputation in the industry. Back when I decided to run away while pregnant. It was he who handled all the domestic affairs for me, allowing me to leave smoothly. Over the past 5 years, we have kept in touch intermittently. He knows everything about me and has always silently supported me. When I called him, Lucas Lincoln didn't hesitate for a moment and flew over from the neighboring city the very next day. We met at a secluded cafe. Wendy, are you okay? Lucas Lincoln looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. I heard you went back to the Scott family. Did Charles Scott give you a hard time? I'm fine. I shook my head and told him about my plan. You want me to help you create hype? Lucas Lincoln asked, somewhat surprised after hearing me out. Exactly, I nodded. Isn't Charles Scott trying to trap me in the Scott family, making me a secret lover who can't see the light of day? Well, I refuse to go along with his plans. I want everyone to know that I, Wendy, am not someone who can only survive by clinging to him. I am not just Mrs. Scott. I am Nix. I want to reveal my identity to the world. I want him to know that I, Wendy, have never been his accessory. But then, your life will never be peaceful again, Lucas Lincoln said with concern. The media will swarm around you like sharks smelling blood. I don't care, I replied, looking at him with a determined gaze. Rather than being passively controlled by him, I'd rather take the initiative and keep the choice in my own hands. Lucas Lincoln fell silent for a long moment before finally nodding. All right, I'll help you. Over the next few days, Lucas Lincoln's public relations company began to exert its influence. A post titled, "Shocking, Mysterious Jewelry Designer Nix Turns Out to be the Wealthy Mrs. Scott," quickly went viral online. The post detailed my achievements in the international jewelry design world over the past 5 years under the identity of Nix. Accompanied by some of my previous design drafts and award photos. Of course, the photos were all edited, showing only my side profile or back, maintaining an air of mystery. At the same time, the post subtly hinted that I am the wife of Charles Scott, with the legendary experience of running away pregnant 5 years ago and now returning with a child to secure my position. This article is both melodramatic and inspiring, filled with drama and buzzworthy topics. In an instant, I went from being a gold digger climbing the social ladder to a strong, independent, and talented abandoned wife of a wealthy family. The public opinion online did a complete 180-degree turn in an instant. Countless netizens were moved by my inspiring story and flocked to the official blog of the Scott Group, accusing Charles Scott of being a scumbag for letting such a talented wife wander outside for 5 years. The stock price of the Scott Group was consequently affected, experiencing a slight decline for several consecutive days. Charles Scott was so furious that he threw his phone directly. He rushed into my studio, glaring at me with bloodshot eyes. Wendy, did you do this? I was leisurely enjoying my afternoon tea. Upon hearing this, I looked up and gave him a slight smile. Yes, Mr. Scott, are you surprised? You're insane, he growled under his breath. Do you have any idea what the consequences of your actions are? I do, I replied. Setting down my teacup and rising to my feet, I walked over to stand before him. The consequence is that I've become the inspirational woman everyone sympathizes with online, while you've turned into the scumbag everyone condemns. Scott Corporation's stock price has also dropped. Does it hurt, President Scott? He seethed, raising his hand as if to strike me. I didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, I met his gaze head-on and said coldly, "Go ahead, hit me. If you dare lay a finger on me today, tomorrow's headlines will read, Scott Corporation President assaults his talented wife. I guarantee your stock price will plummet even further." His hand finally fell limply. He looked at me, his eyes filled with defeat and helplessness. He probably never imagined that one day he would be pushed to this point by a woman. Wendy, what exactly do you want? His voice carried a hint of weariness. What do you think I want? You already know, don't you? I looked at him and said, word by word, I want to go to France to complete the collaboration with DE. This is my career, my dream, and no one can stop me. He fell silent. After a long while, he finally spoke in a hoarse voice. All right, I agree, I won. Watching his desolate figure, I felt not a shred of joy in my heart, despite what should have been a victory. Instead, I felt a bit empty inside. Just the day before I was set to go abroad, Rose came to see me again, this time. She didn't bother to hide her true feelings. Her face was filled with madness and resentment. Wendy, you wretched woman, why did you have to come back? Why did you have to take everything from me? She was holding a fruit knife in her hand, charging toward me with intense emotion. I was startled and instinctively stepped back. Just as the tip of the knife was about to stab me, a figure suddenly rushed over and stood in front of me. It was Charles Scott. The knife plunged deep into his back. Blood instantly stained Charles Scott's white shirt crimson. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. I stared at him in a daze, my mind completely blank. Rose was also terrified, the knife in her hand clattering to the ground with a loud clang. Charles Scott, she stammered, her face as pale as paper. Get out. Charles Scott turned his head and, with all his strength, roared a single word at her. His face had turned unnaturally pale from excessive blood loss, and cold sweat covered his forehead. Rose was so frightened by the ferocity in his eyes that she trembled all over and scrambled away in a panic. Charles Scott's body swayed, and he fell straight backward. Charles Scott, I screamed, rushing to support him. His body was heavy, and I could barely hold him up. Hurry, hurry and call an ambulance, I shouted at the servant beside me, who was frozen in shock. The ambulance arrived quickly. I followed them onto the vehicle, tightly holding Charles Scott's hand. His hand was cold, and his consciousness was beginning to fade. Wendy, he looked at me, speaking weakly. Don't go. My tears could no longer be held back, streaming down my face. I won't go, I choked out. Charles Scott, hold on, you mustn't let anything happen to you. The light in the operating room stayed on for a very, very long time. I stood guard at the door, feeling every minute and every second was torture. Lucy and old Master Scott also rushed over. As soon as Lucy saw me, she rushed over and slapped me. It's all you jinx. If anything happens to Charles Scott, I will never let you off. She screamed at me hysterically. I didn't resist, nor did I speak, just stared blankly at the operating room door. Enough. Old Master Scott's voice was low and stern as he stopped her. Is this the time to talk about these things? Only then did Lucy stop her crying and shouting, but the look she gave me was still filled with venom. I don't know how long it had been when the light in the operating room finally went out. The doctor walked out. The patient is out of critical condition. Hearing those words, my tense nerves finally relaxed, and my entire body went limp as I collapsed to the ground. Charles Scott was transferred to the VIP ward. He is still unconscious due to excessive blood loss. I stay by his hospital bed, not leaving for a moment. Looking at his pale face, my heart is filled with mixed emotions. I hate him. I hate his domineering ways. I hate his tyranny. But when he risked his life to take that knife from me, my heart couldn't help but waver. This man, could it be that he cares about me, even just a little? Mommy, the two children were brought over by Uncle Frank. They were terrified when they saw Charles Scott lying on the bed. What's wrong with Daddy? Sonny asked softly. This was the first time she had voluntarily called him Daddy. My eyes grew hot as I pulled them into my arms. Daddy is fine. He's just asleep. Charles Scott woke up the next afternoon. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was me, asleep with my head resting on the edge of the bed. His gaze softened involuntarily. He reached out, wanting to touch my cheek, but the movement tugged at his wound, making him hiss in pain. I was startled awake. You're awake. I looked at him with delight. Are you feeling unwell anywhere? Should I call a doctor? I'm fine. He shook his head, his voice hoarse as he asked, You didn't leave? I'm not going anywhere. I looked into his eyes and said earnestly, Until you recover from your injuries, I won't go anywhere. I cancelled my trip to France and backed out of the collaboration with DE. Compared to my career, right now, I want to stay by his side more. A faint, almost imperceptible glimmer flashed in Charles Scott's eyes. In the days that followed, I stayed at the hospital, taking care of him wholeheartedly. I bathed him, fed him, and told him stories. Our relationship also underwent subtle changes through this day-to-day closeness. He was no longer that domineering CEO, and I was no longer that defensive hedgehog. We were more like an ordinary couple. That day, Lucas Lincoln came to see me. He brought the latest news about Rose. Rose has been detained by the police for intentional injury. The Sue family wants to bail her out, but the Scott family is taking a very firm stance. It's estimated that this time, she'll be sentenced to at least 3 to 5 years. I nodded, feeling no ripple of emotion in my heart. This is what she deserves. Wendy, Lucas Lincoln looked at me, hesitating to speak. Have you fallen in love with him? I froze. Love? I do not know. All I know is that my heart aches when I see him hurt. My heart warms when I see him smile at me. I don't know. I shook my head, feeling somewhat lost. Wendy, you need to think this through carefully, Lucas Lincoln said earnestly. A man like Charles Scott is too complicated and too dangerous. I'm afraid you'll get hurt. I know, I nodded. Lucas, thank you, but I want to give him, and myself, another chance. Charles Scott's injuries gradually healed day by day under my careful care. The atmosphere between us grew increasingly harmonious. He would tell me amusing stories from his company, and I would share funny anecdotes about the children. He no longer called me Wendy, but rather Wendy. I, too, stopped calling him President Scott and began calling him Charles Scott. Lucy came to see him a few times. Although she still didn't give me a friendly look, she wasn't as aggressive as before. Perhaps it was because she saw how diligently I was taking care of her son. Her attitude toward me softened a bit. Old Master Scott, on the other hand, visited quite frequently. Every time he came, he brought a lot of delicious food, half for Charles Scott and half for me. Whenever he looked at me and Charles Scott, his face always wore a gratified smile. Everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction, until that day, when an unexpected visitor shattered the peace. A woman, dressed exquisitely and exuding an air of nobility, pushed open the door to the hospital room without any prior announcement. Charles Scott, I'm back. The woman's voice was very pleasant, carrying a hint of the soft, gentle Wu dialect typical of women from the South region. When Charles Scott saw her, he was visibly taken aback for a moment, and his brows instinctively furrowed. What are you doing here? I heard you were injured, so I rushed back from abroad just to see you, the woman said as she walked to the bedside, affectionately reaching out to take Charles Scott's hand. However, Charles Scott subtly avoided her touch. The woman's hand froze in midair, a flicker of embarrassment crossing her face, but she quickly regained her composure. Only then did she turn her gaze to me, a hint of scrutiny and hostility in her eyes. Who is this? My wife, Wendy, Charles Scott introduced calmly. Wife. A flicker of shock and disbelief passed through the woman's eyes, but she quickly masked it. She extended her hand toward me, a proper smile gracing her face. Hello, Miss Lynn. My name is Luna. I am Charles Scott's childhood friend. Luna, this name, I have heard it like thunder in my ears. In the original book, she was the one Charles Scott truly loved, his white moonlight. Due to family reasons, she was forced to go abroad for an arranged marriage. Charles Scott was deeply depressed for a long time because of this, and it was during that period that he met Rose, who bore some resemblance to Luna, and took her as a substitute. Later, when Luna divorced and returned to the country, Charles Scott immediately abandoned Rose and reconciled with her, staging a touching drama of a broken mirror made whole, and I, the villainess, was the stumbling block on their path of love, ultimately eliminated by their joint efforts. I never expected that she would return ahead of schedule. Looking at her, a complex and indescribable feeling welled up in my heart. It turns out that what I thought was an opportunity was nothing more than an illusion before the real one returned. I didn't take her hand, just nodded faintly. Miss Luna, hello. The atmosphere instantly became somewhat awkward. Wendy, take the child out for a walk first. I have something to say to her. Charles Scott suddenly spoke up. I glanced at him, then at Luna, feeling a sharp pang in my heart. See, as soon as the real one returns, I become an outsider. I said nothing, silently taking the two children and leaving the hospital room. Standing in the hallway, I could still faintly hear the conversation coming from inside. Charles Scott, why did you marry her? You know perfectly well that I've always had you in my heart. That's all in the past. No, it's not in the past. I know you still have me in your heart too, don't you? Otherwise, why have you always refused to touch Rose? I couldn't hear the rest of what was said. I don't want to hear any more either. I took the child and returned home, utterly devastated. That night, Charles Scott did not come back. He didn't return the next day, nor the day after. I called him, but he didn't answer. The last glimmer of hope in my heart was completely extinguished. It turns out that deep affection and tenderness have their time limits. When the white moonlight appears, all substitutes should fade away into the shadows. I looked at my haggard reflection in the mirror and suddenly laughed. Wendy, oh Wendy, you really are a fool. How could you ever believe that a man who was willing to die for his first love in a book would truly fall in love with you? Enough. It's time to wake up from this dream. I took out my phone and dialed Lucas Lincoln's number again. Lucas, book me 2 tickets for the fastest flight. Anywhere is fine. Wendy, You, don't ask. I just want to leave here as soon as possible. This time, I won't look back. Charles Scott, Luna, I wish you a happy marriage and a childless future. I took the children and left the Scott family overnight, without alerting anyone, just like 5 years ago. I left without a sound, taking not a single cloud with me, except for my heart, which felt as if a piece had been carved out, leaving an empty, hollow ache. The plane landed in Paris, France. I chose this place. First because I wanted to complete the collaboration with DE, and second because it was far enough away from City A. I rented an apartment in Paris as quickly as possible and settled in. Then, I proactively contacted the person in charge of DE to express my intention to collaborate. They warmly welcomed my arrival. Soon, I threw myself into intense and busy work. I numbed myself with work, leaving no time to think about that man, yet, every time the night grows still and quiet, his face still uncontrollably surfaces in my mind. I remember the resolute look in his eyes when he shielded me from the knife. I remember him holding my hand on the hospital bed, begging me not to leave. I remember the gentle, doting look in his eyes when he gazed at me. My heart still aches. Mommy, are you unhappy again? Sonny hugged my neck and asked softly. I snapped back to reality and forced a smile. No, Mommy is very happy. You're lying. Twilight saw right through me. You missed that bad dad. My smile froze on my face. I do not, I stubbornly retorted. You do, Twilight said coolly. You called his name in your sleep last night. My face instantly flushed bright red. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number from City A. I hesitated for a moment, then answered the call. Hello. From the other end of the line came a voice I never expected to hear. Miss Lynn. It's me, Lucy. I froze. Lucy. What is she calling me for, Miss Lynn? I know you hate our Scott family, and you hate Charles Scott, but I beg you, please come back. Lucy's voice carried a hint of sobbing and pleading. Charles Scott, he's not going to make it. I felt as if struck by lightning. My whole mind went blank. You, what did you say? Charles Scott, in order to find you, dragged his still unhealed body all over City A. Later, the wound became infected, causing a high fever. And he has been unconscious ever since, the doctor said. The doctor said his will to live is very weak. If we don't find a way to wake him up soon, he might never wake up again. Lucy choked back sobs. Miss Lynn, I know we wronged you in the past, but please, for the sake of the child, for the sake of him taking a knife for you, come back and see him, even in his unconscious state. He keeps calling your name. My phone slipped from my hand and fell to the ground. My mind went completely blank. Charles Scott, is he really not going to make it? How could this be? Shouldn't he be living happily ever after with his first love? Why would, Mommy, what's wrong? The children's worried voices pulled my thoughts back. Looking at their little faces, so much like Charles Scott's, my heart felt as if it were being cut by a knife. No, I can't let him die. If he dies, my child will have no father. I booked a flight back to City A as quickly as I could. When I set foot on this land again, my emotions were at their most complex. I rushed straight to the hospital. In the hospital room, Charles Scott lay quietly on the bed, an oxygen mask covering his face, his complexion so pale it seemed drained of all color. In just a few short days, he appeared to have lost a great deal of weight. My tears could no longer be held back, and they poured out in a torrent. I walked to the bedside, took his cold hand, and choked out, Charles Scott, you bastard, who said you could die? I haven't agreed to it yet. How dare you die? Wake up. You have to wake up for me. Didn't you want me to be your Mrs. Scott? I'll agree. Okay, as long as you wake up, I'll do anything. I lay on his chest, crying my heart out. Perhaps my sobbing had an effect. I felt the hand that was holding mine twitch slightly. I suddenly lifted my head and was overjoyed to see his eyelids fluttering faintly. He is about to wake up. Charles Scott slowly opened his eyes. He looked at me, his gaze still somewhat dazed, but when he clearly saw my face, immense surprise and ecstasy instantly burst forth in his eyes. Wendy, he called my name in a hoarse voice. I'm here. I gripped his hand tightly, tears once again blurring my vision. You're back. I'm back. I nodded, my voice choked with emotion. I'm not leaving, never leaving again. A weak yet contented smile spread across his face. He reached out, wanting to touch my face. I quickly lowered my head, letting his cold fingers brush against my cheek. I'm sorry, He looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt and remorse. I'm sorry, Wendy, it's all my fault. I shook my head. It's not your fault. No, it is my fault, he insisted stubbornly. I shouldn't have doubted you, shouldn't have let you suffer, and most of all, I shouldn't have let Luna provoke you. I froze. White Moon, she wasn't called by me, he explained. She came on her own. There's been no connection between us for a long time. The reason I sent you away that day was to make things completely clear with her, to tell her not to disturb us anymore. But that day, I heard you two saying, what did you hear? I told him what I had overheard in the corridor that day. After listening, he let out a bitter laugh. You only heard the beginning, but not the end. That day, I told her that the one I love is you, and in this lifetime, I will only marry you. I asked her never to appear before me again, but I never expected that she would refuse to give up, and even had my mother arrange for her to join the company, hoping to take advantage of the situation. I went crazy after I found out you were gone. I drove her out of the company and used every connection I had to look for you. I was afraid. Afraid you would disappear without a trace again, just like 5 years ago, leaving me unable to find you. Wendy, you don't know how I got through those 5 years. I thought of you every day, missing you so much it drove me nearly insane. I sent countless people to search for you, but there was no trace at all. I thought I would never see you again in this lifetime, until that day, when I saw you and the child in the restaurant. It felt like a dream. I was afraid that if I blinked, you would disappear again. That's why I used such an extreme way to force you to stay by my side. I'm sorry, Wendy, I was just too afraid of losing you. He spoke so much in one breath that his breathing became somewhat unsteady. Listening to his words, I had long been in tears. So, that's how it was. So, all of this was just a misunderstanding. It turns out, this man loves me so deeply, so humbly. Silly. I leaned down and planted a gentle kiss on his forehead. You big silly, he smiled. Like a child. Wendy, have you forgiven me? I nodded. Then, do you still love me? He asked cautiously, looking into his hopeful eyes. I broke into a smile through my tears. Charles Scott, listen carefully. I cupped his face and said, word by word, I love you. 3 words made his eyes instantly red. He abruptly pulled me into his embrace, holding me tightly as if he wanted to press me into his very bones and blood. Wendy, I love you too. Outside the hospital room, Lucy, old Master Scott, and the 2 children watched us through the glass window on the door, tightly embracing, and all wore relieved smiles on their faces. Great, Mom and Dad have finally made up. Sunny clapped her hands happily, although Jasper still wore a cool expression. The slight upward curve of his lips betrayed his good mood at the moment. Lucy wiped the tears from the corner of her eye and looked at old Master Scott. Dad, it seems we've all underestimated Wendy. Old Master Scott nodded, a glint of wisdom flashing in his eyes. Indeed, this daughter-in-law of ours is no ordinary person. It's Charles Scott's good fortune to have married her. Charles Scott's body, under my meticulous care and the nourishment of love, recovered rapidly. On the day he was discharged from the hospital, the first thing he did was take me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a new marriage certificate. Looking at the brand new marriage certificate, he smiled like a 200-pound child. Now, you can't run away, he said triumphantly in my ear. I rolled my eyes at him, but my heart felt sweet. Back home, Charles Scott announced an important decision in front of everyone. He was going to transfer 50% of the shares under his name to me. I don't agree. I was the first to stand up and object. Charles Scott, are you crazy? That's the empire you worked so hard to build. Nothing is more important than you and our child. Not even the country. He held my hand, looking at me with deep affection. Wendy, all of this is what I owe you. I only wish to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Lucy did not object this time. Instead, she watched us with a look of relief. Charles Scott is right. This is what our Scott family owes you. Please accept it. Under the insistence of both father and son, I ultimately accepted this grand gift. From then on, Wendy was not only the talented jewelry designer, Nix, but also one of the largest shareholders of the Scott Group. My love story with Charles Scott was also widely reported by the media, becoming a wealthy fairy tale that everyone in City A envied. As for that former, white moonlight, Luna, after being driven out of the company by Charles Scott, she refused to accept defeat and tried to use some underhanded methods to sabotage our relationship. In the end, Charles Scott showed no mercy and sent her abroad. warning her never to return to City A again. Rose, on the other hand, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for intentional injury. The Sue family, having offended the Scott family, saw their business plummet and soon declared bankruptcy. Everything has settled. That evening, Charles Scott hugged me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Wendy, let's have another wedding. The last one was too rushed. This time, I want to give you the grandest wedding in the world. So everyone knows you are the woman I love most. I turned around, looked at his handsome face, and nodded with a smile. The sunlight streamed through the window, bathing us in its warm and beautiful glow. I know that our happiness has only just begun. I am no longer the villainess who had to run away with the baby, but the one-of-a-kind treasure he holds in the palm of his hand. And he is no longer the cold and ruthless domineering CEO, but the father of my child, my one and only love. We still have a long, long way to go, but this time, we will hold each other's hands tightly and never let go again. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.